Welcome to the Divorce Allies podcast, a podcast and video series where we dive into the complexities of the divorce mediation and litigation process with a team of financial professionals, divorce mortgage planning services, forensic accountants, parenting, and relationship coaches. We cover all of the areas of the divorce process from financial to emotional well-being. Today, I'm with Victoria McCooey, who is our narcissistic divorce coach. And I really wanted to discuss the patterns of narcissism, people who might not be diagnosed as a narcissist, but those high conflict tendencies and how we see them in dating and in marriage. So welcome, Victoria. How are you? Can you
Hey,
introduce yourself?
thanks so much for having me. Yeah, when I get introduced as a narcissistic divorce coach, it's like I'm not the narcissist.
You're not the narcissist.
So I help mainly women who are trying to divorce a narcissistic partner. And to answer your question, we don't know if they're diagnosable as a narcissist, and it really doesn't matter.
Mhm.
We're not psychiatrists, and even psychiatrists have a difficult time. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of overlap of tendencies. So what we're really talking about here is a person who you've identified as toxic because of their behaviors, their grandiosity, how they consistently lie, cheat, steal, gaslight you, tell you what you know is true is not true, manipulate you, are controlling. Maybe they control all the finances. Maybe they control physically when you can come and go or leave or where you go. Those are narcissistic tendencies. So that's what we're talking about here. It's not like you need a card from the psychiatrist saying they're a narcissist, you can divorce them, right? If
Right.
these traits are so overwhelming and toxic to you, then that's a red flag. That's a problem. You should not want to stay in a place where you're having to be abused in this way. And it is abuse,
Yeah.
whether it's emotional abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse. These are all, and of course, physical abuse, but these are all not okay. There is a line, and everybody's line might be a little different. I think that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah. And I think we'll get into it in a little bit, but I think you and we're people that love lists. We love checklists. We love going through a bulleted item and seeing, okay, I think this is what a lot of people are going online and trying to check boxes. Okay, if I mark 15 out of 20, then this person is a narcissist. Do you recommend people researching these type of things online and checking those lists and like, oh, is she a narcissist? What's going on? Or are you just trying to advocate if it's a toxic behavior, it's a toxic behavior?
Well, I think everyone has to go through the motions of that.
Yeah.
It's just our human nature to try. It's validating to read and understand what you're dealing with. It's not in your head. You're being told by your partner that you're the crazy one, that you're too sensitive, too emotional, too whatever. So yeah, you need some validation that this is a thing. I remember when I first found it. It was so long ago when I was married to my narcissistic husband. There was no social media. There was no Google. No one even used the word narcissist. We didn't even know what that was back then. And the first time he had the kids when we first separated, and he had the kids for the day, and it was the first, I had 3 little bitty kids. It was the first time I had any time to myself, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I went to the library. And
Wow.
I went into the psychiatry section and started reading all of these reference books about personality disorders. And that's where I first ran across narcissistic personality disorder. And as I'm turning the pages, I'm like, they are in my house watching what happens. It was just to the letter. And I didn't think anyone had ever experienced what I was going through before.
And
So
that's crazy because we were just speaking to a client yesterday and she's seen all of the content you've been posting and she said exactly verbatim, I felt like Victoria was in my house watching. Exactly. So it's really crazy that these type of personalities do share so many similar patterns. And so I do want to focus on those patterns, but I want to go all the way back to the dating. So when you start dating someone who is a narcissist or has these narcissistic tendencies, are there certain patterns in the dating that you see?
Sure, there are. And we can talk about what that looks like. You can see I have another idea. There's something more to this, but yes,
Yeah.
just to answer your question, yes, there's love bombing. There's overly attentiveness, overly affectionate, overly committed, overly gift giving, love bombing. So much so fast, and it kind of sweeps you off your feet, which is probably the intention. So yay, that's lovely. Everybody wants more of that, right? But it's a red flag. But let me just get to the crux of the whole thing.
Please.
When you have, it's about you. You're being targeted for a reason. Um, it's about how you see yourself. When you have high self-esteem and great self-worth and confidence, you are not going to be attractive to a narcissist.
Yeah.
They're not going to spend their energy or time or money trying to woo you because
Mhm.
they know they're never going to get what they need from you. So it's more about you than them. It's more about you working on you so that you repel narcissists in the first
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
But I did it. All of my clients did it. We all fell for it.
Of
Um,
course.
And yeah, it was a time in my life when I did not have good self-esteem. I can recognize my own traits that caused this to become a relationship so easily now. It would never happen to me in the state I'm in today. But
Sure.
to that girl, absolutely. I didn't have a support system. I lived far away from my family. I didn't have a community to hold a mirror up and say, this is not right, or that's
Yeah.
weird, or I was very much alone, and it was easier to trick me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you can talk from it as a personal level or just at a generic level, but is there a timeline in which all of that switches? Is it when you're still dating, or is when marriage comes into the picture, that's when all the behavior changes to the toxicity?
I want to say I'm pretty sure there will be signs. It's whether you choose to ignore them or not. And
Mm.
like I say, it depends on your level of confidence and self-esteem. There were a lot of signs, there were a lot of red flags for me that I chose to ignore. I
Yeah,
talked myself out of thinking they were a problem because I wanted this relationship so badly.
sure. Sure.
So it was a me problem. Right there, it's about whether you lie to yourself about, gee, that doesn't seem very healthy, or like that's a little scary. But it's easy to look the other way when there's so much good.
Of course. And we were just talking yesterday that our instincts as females are so strong. But then when you have this overwhelming gift giving and admiration in the show, it's like, well, on paper, it looks really great. So I should just ignore all those instincts I have because,
You look, we can
whatever.
talk ourselves into anything. It's like, well, nobody's perfect,
Yeah,
and oh, he was having a bad day, and there are lots of things. So it's not a one size fits all, right? You have to take each incident with a grain of salt. And sure, people do have bad days. Sure, things do happen out of the ordinary and people react badly one time. But what I'm talking about is consistently doing things that are illegal, immoral, um, not what you would want in your life, So I see the dynamic. I mean, I've been doing this for so long.
yeah,
All of the women who are attracted to me, and I've coached men too, but I'm just, we're talking about women today. All of the women who are attracted to my messaging are just like I was. I mean, they went through the same wooing, love bombing phase that I did, it's all very textbook.
Yeah.
And they all can see now, yeah, that wasn't right, but I let it go because we're typically very nurturing, forgiving, accepting, compromising type people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And, we don't have, I think the underlying thing I want to point out is none of these people had a very strong support system. They weren't
Sure.
going home to their family every night and talking about what was going on. It wouldn't have gotten this far if they had
Yeah.
had a strong support system or friends saying, really? I mean, I can remember even back in my own courtship, a couple of times because I lived so far from the people I grew up with, occasionally there would be someone in town and like maybe seeing someone from my past. And yes, they would put on a show, but every once in a while the mask would drop. And I remember one in particular, someone I knew from childhood saying, wow, really? Is that who you're going out with? And I didn't want to hear it, right? Because I wanted to believe this fairy tale I was telling myself.
Of course. And it's human, right? Like, we're not psychologists. We're not going to sit here and talk psychology, but that's at the end of the day, that's just human nature. And a lot of us are people pleasers by nature. So we want to make sure the situation is always perfect and everything's great. Um, but I want to go back a little bit. So in the very beginning, you mentioned that you're reading these textbooks and you're thinking, are they in my house? And then we were talking to a client yesterday and she's like, is Victoria in my house watching? What are those? Could you give examples of those
Oh,
specific
yeah.
patterns?
It's so insidious. It's hard to explain. That's why she didn't explain it. I haven't explained it. I'm going to try, but they're
Okay.
just so slightly nuanced that to the naked eye, they don't seem like a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it happens. Because if you were to call them out on something, you would seem petty,
Mm.
right? It's so slight, but somewhere deep in your gut, you know that they're doing it for a reason. And their answer, is going to be, what? That you're upset about that? That's nothing. Like, what? You can't handle things because you're overly sensitive, you're overly emotional, or whatever. So, because we're not very confident, we let it go.
Yeah.
But then it builds and then it builds. And it's just over years you let that go. So then there's like it's like they get a little opening and they keep wedging themselves closer and closer. Like I said, it's so hard to explain verbally, but when you're living it,
Yeah.
you know that there is something wrong with the behavior or the language or the facial expressions or whatever it is, but you can't quite put your finger on it to say stop doing that
Yeah.
because it wouldn't make sense. But they find ways to creep in, and now the bar, well, I should go the other way, the bar for their behavior just gets lower and lower and lower and lower and lower until you're accepting horrible treatment.
Yeah. And do you think all of that, the base is manipulation? So everyone might have an off day and you might not treat your partner with the utmost respect, but that's, you had a bad day, you're not being mature. Okay. But do you think people with these personalities, all of those small little wedges, everything is at the base of manipulation?
So I make a joke about how I think they have meetings and they have a manual and they go through it and they all do the same things in the same order because they have these meetings where it's crazy how similar they all are in their behaviors. It's predictable.
Yeah.
And that's why I always say I have the easiest job in the world. I know exactly what they're going to do. I've seen it 100
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And you don't believe me when I first tell you. Oh, no, no, no. He would never do that. He would never say that. He would never.
So do you quite literally have a playbook and you're like, okay, so this is the phase you're at. Boom, next phase. I can predict this, what he's going to say this month or how he's going to act or he or she, we're not putting genders on it, but from patterns, this is what we see.
It's not so much a timeline as it is
Okay.
a reactive, like when you do this, he will do this. When you do this, he will do,
Okay.
it's the reactions he will get. When you try to create a boundary around something, there will be a certain pushback.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
So it's that style.
right, right. Okay, so here's a great example from my first marriage where I lost all control of the money I made. Didn't
Okay.
happen in a day.
Mhm.
I wouldn't let that happen in a day. If he said, "Hey, from now on, you give me all of your checks, and I control all the money," I wouldn't have said, "Oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea." Right? It was a little step at a time. So I had 3 babies in 3 years. I was a freelance writer. So during that time, I worked very little. So I made very little money. He was carrying everything. And of course, well, first of all, it was a whole house of cards. I thought there was money that there wasn't. Everything was leveraged. It was like a whole, you know, scheme. But I didn't know that at the time. So money was never an issue. Everything's great. So at that point, I would get a small project that I would, do between feedings or whatever, and I would get a small paycheck. And he would say like, "Oh, you know what? Just give me that because I'm going to pay the whatever bill with that." And it would be like, "Yeah, sure." Like I'm earning nothing practically.
Yeah.
That's how it started. That
Okay.
was the crack. And then it was every check. And then when I went back gradually, more and more, even to full time, I could never get control of those checks again because there was always, "Oh, but I already knew that, I already spent this because I knew you were doing this. So I need," and me being a people pleaser, I want a team player. I'm home having babies. Of course, like until it wasn't okay anymore. But
Yeah.
now the precedent's been set. Now I'm the bad guy
Mhm.
saying, "Oh no, my money is my money." Like that's not going to fly.
Yeah.
Um, so that's an example of how they just like it's insidious. It's like no big deal. If you said anything, you would seem petty, right?
Yeah.
No, you can't have this $500 check, even though you're paying all the expenses for everything, So that is how they take advantage. And it's a layering.
Yeah. And it's over time. And I think from a previous conversation you and I had before, you mentioned that on average, it takes someone in a type of relationship like this 6 to 7 times of saying they're going to leave to actually leave.
Yes, that is a statistic. I'm not making that up. It
Mhm.
takes women. This is about it's actually women in abusive relationships. So
Okay.
married or not married,
Okay.
takes them 7 tries. They try to leave and either give up or change their minds or go back on average 7 times before they leave for good.
And what makes that the seventh time, the one that's going to stick?
Well, always say my job is to lower that number, right?
Mhm.
So, nobody's going to do it the first time because, of course, it's like you're reasonable. You're going to give someone a chance to change.
Yeah.
So, what's the right number? Who knows? But I think it's when you get the right support. I think it's when you start talking to people about the situation and you start having people hold up a mirror that is not their mirror that they're showing you. They're holding up, we call it the carnival mirror, where you're like distorted and that they're telling you this is your reality. It's not. So when you get somebody on the outside who actually holds up a mirror for you and says, "Look at what your life is. Look at what's going on here. You think this is okay?" Like you wouldn't suggest to anyone else that they stay in this situation.
Yeah. 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 And that's always what I say, from people in my life. I'm much younger in a generation that hasn't quite been married yet. And so I always ask my friends or my peers, well, what advice would you be giving me or someone else if I had a partner that was treating me this way? And it's kind of that reverse mirror, like, well, let's take away that carnival mirror that you see at home and put it somewhere else. But so as we're kind of wrapping this up, what advice do you have to people that are in these marriages, in these relationships, and then they've identified these patterns? They're realizing, okay, I think I'm ready to get out, but how do you even have that conversation with someone with this personality?
Okay, so it becomes like a trauma bond, right? They
Mhm.
want so much of your time and energy because they don't want you getting outside information. They don't want you finding things out. So they try to keep you occupied with entangled with them, and you have this trauma bond. You actually get addicted to the chaos and the drama,
Mhm.
and your body is waiting for that next rush
Yeah.
of draw. Even though it's negative, you're addicted. So it's really hard to pull yourself out of it. Even if intellectually you know you should, it's physically hard to get out of it. So
Yeah.
instead of confronting the narcissist, I think the first thing that you have to do, aside from creating some sort of community, is to try to become more independent
Mhm.
without discussion about it, because they're going to make it very hard for you to leave. So start start doing some inner work about getting your confidence level back up and restoring your self-esteem. Like maybe you find ways to go, if they probably will make it very hard for you to do this, but if you could go take a class or go be around other people, try to do something that fills you up. Start exercising or start meditating or start going to church or start whatever that spiritual thing is for you, to try to get some strength, and start focusing on you and you getting stronger and healing from the abuse. That is pretty much the only way you're going to be able to put up any kind of boundary or leave, because they've worn you down. You're so compromised right now.
Yeah, and what you said about how people get that almost they're addicted to that rush is the best advice for that to still get independent and do more things. So you're detaching that adrenaline from
Yeah, yeah. So
back and forth.
the perfect scenario would be to replace that rush with a different rush.
Okay.
So something positive. That's why exercise is so great.
Okay.
So you get the endorphins going. So if like whenever you're like crave it, or you may not realize you're craving it, but when you're like thinking I need to be around that person,
Mm.
you go for a run or you go to the gym or you go lift weights or you do something else that's going to get your blood boiling,
Yeah.
get
Different
your
way.
blood pumping and get a different kind of rush. It might satiate you to the point where you can start separating from this trauma bond that's been
Mhm.
created.
So fascinating. And Victoria, thank you so much for all your insight. You are a genius.
I don't know about that.
Besides, and besides what we're creating, the Divorce Allies, which will be launching very, very soon, how can people get in contact with you directly?
Well, they can visit my website, which is just my name, victoriamcooey.com. That is where you can learn more about me. You can download a free gift that tells you it changes from time to time, but it will give you great resources and information and tips and tricks. And then if you're ready to talk to me about your own situation, you can book a call with me, and the link to do that is on my website.
Perfect. And I will link everything in the description below. So you'll have Victoria's email and website and all that good stuff. So once again, thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Thanks.